what is the difference between something good, something bad, something powerful, something not powerful? Well, there are many potential differences, but I want to talk about one in particular, and that is audience involvement, something that you've probably heard many, many times. What does that really mean, and how do you involve them? Well, one very simple way that you hear a lot is use their hands, do the stuff in their hands. Of course, this really is a great way to involve someone. It's very, very, very simple, and just by doing something in someone's hands, it can elevate the effect considerably. But I think that there are two kind of ways that I end up thinking about audience involvement to some extent, which is the mental and the physical side. So let's talk about the physical side first. How can you involve them physically? Well, one of those physical things is doing something in their hands, of course. It could also be asking them to shuffle a deck of cards or asking them to inspect something. So physically involving them in something early on is going to help. There are many routines, if you look at throughout the family, where you see me trying to physically involve them in what's happening, either by holding me on the wrist or by doing something in their hands or by whatever it may be. But just having them shuffle at the beginning, and it's not always something that you will have always seen in the family, because sometimes we may have already done that or whatever it is, how we go in, but in the real world, when I do something, I'll almost always just say shuffle these first. It just involves them physically on some level. Now, just by doing those simple things of asking them to shuffle and doing something in their hands, whatever it may be, that's going to pull them in physically. There's also like holding their hands out or passing someone to something or giving someone a pen or asking them if they have some change for something or whatever it may be where they physically have to interact. That's a very, very good thing. Now, this is going to make them feel part of the event, and it allows them to take ownership over elements of it and become involved and create something bespoke. But there are other things that you can do with mental things. Like, for example, if they have a choice. So giving them a choice of something, to think of something. Now, if you get them to choose a card and they reach in and take one, for example, that's also a physical selection. But if you ask them to think of one, this is now kind of a mental involvement. So often I try to kind of figure out ways to balance both elements, where there's some mental and physical stuff going on. I find that the kind of combination of those things tends to pull someone in just that little bit more. So just by having that small kind of framework around mentally and physically involving someone, I think kind of really, really helps. Now, what else can you do to kind of involve them? Well, we are all, whatever it may be, in a specific environment. So is it possible to kind of reference things that are in the environment to pull into this moment, to make this more bespoke? It might even be the weather. It might be kind of, I don't know, objects they may own, or jewelry they're wearing, or clothes they have, whatever it may be. Or it could be anything that's happening around you even. And it doesn't mean you just have to run, with reckless abandon into mentioning everything, like, a stand-up comedian pointing out things in their environment. It doesn't mean it can be subtle. It doesn't have to be overly specific. But just having that ability to involve something in the environment is going to just pull something, make something unique, and pull something from what's here, make it a bit bespoke. It could even be the way someone laughs or the way someone says something. You can reference that and pull that in. Something that's happening in this environment, giving them something to do, which physically involves them, giving them a choice, which allows them to take part. You have to think about, if you were doing something, why would you care? If you were watching someone do something, and what would make you care about something? Well, often, if you've got no engagement with it, what are you doing? You're just passively observing. And if you don't involve them, they're just watching a guy do some tricks. And that's not that interesting. To watch a guy do something, it could be interesting, and there are ways it can be, but it doesn't involve them. And often if you have something and you show something to someone when they're just watching you, it's not that interesting to say to someone, I saw this guy do a thing. It's okay. But if you involve them and they become part of it, they say, oh, this thing happened to me today. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the goal of this is, some form of promotion where they start telling stories about you. I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about the individual, how to make an experience that's slightly more impactful. And like I said, if you involve them, this is something that happened to them. This happened to me today. And there are many, many subtle layers of that. And so thinking about all the different types of ways that you can just reference the moment, pull stuff from the environment into this, involve them physically, involve them mentally, utilize their choices, their hands, their decisions. And when any of those things happen or they say something, listen and talk and reference. And therefore you're creating something that feels that they can take ownership and responsibility for to some extent, maybe not full responsibility, but they can at least have some form of involvement, some active engagement with what's happening. Now, obviously, if you can make them laugh, that's another form of involvement, because now you've tickled a funny bone or whatever it may be. Maybe you've said something that stimulates their imagination, and that involves them, causes them to think. Even something like a question can cause them to become involved by having to answer. And again, a question is on the kind of more mental side, but there is mental and physical involvement and thinking about that, as opposed to just thinking about what you're doing, just thinking about the trick or effect that you're doing. Can you just do that, but have these very small things that just pull them into what is happening? And sometimes they are very, very, very subtle. And I find that very, very interesting. Now, there's a very interesting quote by Jim Steinmeier, where he says, the art of a magician is not found in the simple deception, but what surrounds it. The construction of reality which supports the illusion. And to me, if you don't involve them mentally and physically, that art will never reveal itself.